Hi everyone, now it's time to run a container from the image. We will see how we run the container, how to monitor it, and how we exit a container. Just as a reminder, we said in the last chapter that an image is just the instructions to build the container. So once we have the image in our computer, we will use it to run it. There are two different ways to run the container. You can do it in the background or in the foreground, or what is also called interactive mode. In particular, now we will do it in an interactive mode. So the way that you do that is to execute Podman run. And here a reminder that if you prefer to use Docker, you can replace Podman with Docker, and this will work in exactly the same way. So this flags IT means that we will enable the interactive session, and T gives access to the terminal. So we will specify the name of the image that we downloaded, Matthew, intro to Docker. We can specify the tag, and we will explain to the Podman, I want to use bash. So this will execute the container in a bash session. Okay, now we are inside the container. We can confirm that using pwd. This shows me that I am inside the home Docker data. I'm not in my host anymore. And even you can look with hostname what is the name of this machine that is being executed, or this container that is being executed. This is just a generated hostname. Even more, we can check the OS version. So if we do cat etc OS release, this shows me that this image created a container that is executing Debian and the different pieces of information about the operating system. You may wonder why we are in this home Docker data. This is the working directory that was set when the image was created. In the next chapters, we will see how to create our own images and how to specify the working directory. So for now, just take for granted that this image was created with this home/data as the working directory. Okay, how do we monitor containers? We will have to open a new tab in my machine, because this is now the window that is executing the container, and I can use Podman PS to take a look at what are the containers that are being executed in my machine. So you can see that it gives me information about the container. This is just the container ID, the name, what is the command that is being executed. So in this case, we are in interactive mode executing a bash session. And you can see that at the end, there is a name that is provided to the container by default. So this name is just a reference. You can rename it if you want. So for example, this was just created randomly by the tool. I can say Podman rename, and I want to rename my container because Sleepy doesn't tell me too much. So I can simply say I will rename this with the container ID, and then I can say I want to call this my Podman example. So if I do Podman PS again, now this container is exactly the same as the one that we saw before, but now the name is my Podman example. This is more meaningful than the default name. You can also rename using the name. So if I do Podman rename my Podman example as my awesome example, it works in the same way. So this is the new name of my container. And one more thing is that you can specify the name when you execute the container. In that case, if you do Podman run, for example, if I exit this container, and I do the same command, but additionally I specify a name on that, like name my, let's use a different one. If I do Podman PS, I can see that my container now has the name that I specify. This is handy because when you have different containers being executed, you want to remember why you executed that container in the first place. Okay, let's go back to the terminal in which we have the container. We can create a file in the container. Let's say, for example, I do test.txt. This will just create a test.txt file. And then if we exit the container, we can see that the container is not running anymore, so it's not listed. The reason is because when you exit the container by default, this will stop. So it only was running while I had my interactive session, and this because of my options -IT. But if I do Podman PS -A, it will show me information about the containers even if I exit them. So they didn't disappear, they are just not running, and by default Podman PS will not show them. Actually, when we have the container ID, we can simply re-execute them with Podman start. For example, the container ID of my awesome example. And then if I do Podman PS, it will show me that now the container is running, and I can do Podman attach and the ID of the container, and I am now inside the container again. So remember, outside the container, I am in a Mac OS machine. Inside the container, I am in a Linux Debian machine. Another option to interact with a container that is being executed is using the exec command. So if I do Podman PS, I see that my container is running. The initial command was bin bash, so if I do attach, this will be executed again. But I can do something different. For example, I can do Podman exec, specify an interactive session, and use the container ID, that is this one. And let's say that in this case, I want to display the information of the operating system. So if I do that, this simply will execute the command that I specify inside the container, and it will provide me the information. You can do the same by name. So if I do Podman exec and I specify my awesome container, it will also work. And it shows me the information of the operating system as well. So far, let's take a look at what are the containers that we have created from the image. So if we do Podman PSA, we see 3 containers that we have created so far. And if you remember, we created a file in one of those. So we can do Podman start this container, my awesome container, and then I can do Podman attach my container, and you can see that the file that we created a few lines above, it's still there. So the container is an instance that stays in your computer. So there may be some cases in which you want to simply execute a container to perform some action or perform some operation, but you don't want to keep the container. If that's the case, you have the flag --rm to run the container, but not keeping the instance after you exit it. So for example, if I do Podman run rm it, and we specify the image, that in this case, it's again the image of Matthew. And let's say we execute bin bash again. This shows me in a new terminal that I have a new container with this name, and if I exit the container after my work is done and I look again at what are the containers in my computer, this new container, it's gone because we specify the option -rm. So again, this is useful if you want to perform an operation with a container, but after you are done with that, you are not interested on keeping the container.